Good afternoon, Namibia. It is D-Day here at the Safari Convention Center, where the SWAPO's 6th elective Congress has been taking place over the last 4 days. But obviously, this is the moment we've all been waiting for, where 11 candidates are contesting for the top 4 position, as well as for central committee positions that will be taking place here. Now, just to give you a quick recap of what's been happening over the last 4 days, obviously, the first day, the Thursday, the 23rd of November, started off with an official opening ceremony where the incumbent president gave an opening statement that involved a lot of recognition in terms of the storms and how the campaign's been taking place. But I think the most fundamental moment from day one was the closed session with the 2 former presidents stating their dissatisfaction with the way that the nature of these campaigns were played out. And then we moved on to day 2, where they looked at the agenda of the Congress and the resolutions that were made. That moved on to day 3 as well. But what came out of day 3 was the permanent status that was given to 4 candidates, 4 prior senior officials of the party, as well as 3 members who got permanent status in the Central Committee. But obviously, today is the day that everybody's been waiting for, and we know that Tisa Namenje is the residing officer for the elections that have been taking place. The elections just started. People are voting currently, and we expect the results to be coming out later today. Before we give you more information and before we talk to the Secretary Generals of the SWAPO Party, we'd like to give you a quick insert that looks at the profiles of the candidates that are vying for the top 4 positions. Let's take a look. Now we'll be looking at the profiles of the candidates. Obviously, we've got 3 people running for the party presidencies. We have Dr. Agegengop obviously competing against Anas Angula, as well as Jerry Ekanjo. Well, obviously, these are veterans within the party, and they've got a long-standing history within the party. Let's quickly have a quick recap of the profile of Dr. Agegengop. He was obviously the 3rd and current president of the country, and has been in office since March 2015 as the president of the country. Dr. Gengop served as the Prime Minister of the country from 1992 to 2002, as well as from 2012 to 2015. So you see that the experience lies there. He was elected SWAPO Party Vice President in 2007 in an uncontested election and was re-elected in 2012. He obviously was then elected as the Namibian president in the elections in 2014. Now let's take a quick look at Anas Angula. Anas Angula served as the Prime Minister of Namibia from the 21st of March 2005 to the 4th of December 2012. He was succeeded, interestingly, by Hage Geingob in a cabinet reshuffle from the 2012 SWAPO Congress. He subsequently then served as the Minister of Defense before retiring from national politics in 2012 till 2015. Angula was the Minister of Education, prior also of Sport and Culture, as well as the Minister of Higher Education from 1995 to 2005. Then the last candidate that will be contesting for the presidency of the SWAPO Party is Jerry Ekanjo. Jerry Ekanjo is the current Minister of Youth and Sports, serving in the position since 2012. Previously, he was the Deputy Minister of Local Government and Housing from 1990 to 95, Minister of Home Affairs from 1995 to 2005, Minister of Lands and Resettlement from 2005 to 2008, and the Minister of Regional, Local Government and Housing in Rural Development from 2008 till 2012. Now, in 2012, Ekanjo was a candidate for the Vice President of SWAPO and came second to Hage Geingob, who eventually won this position. So it's not the first time that these men are contesting each other for the position. They're just doing it for the presidency now, where they did it for the vice presidency the previous time. Those are your 3 candidates for the presidency tonight: Dr. Hage Geingob, Anas Angula, as well as Jerry Ekanjo. Now, if we quickly look at what's happening for the vice presidency, there's obviously 3 candidates that are contesting for that, and we'll start with Netombo Nandi-Ndaitwah, who is the current Deputy Prime Minister, as well as the Minister of International Relations and Cooperation here in Namibia, a position she's been serving since 2012. Now, from March 2012 to December 2012, she was the Minister of Environment and Tourism before she was appointed the Minister of International Relations. Now, she will be contesting against Helmut Angula. Helmut Angula obviously is a Namibian businessman, politician, and former cabinet minister. He's a director of companies right now, but in his previous profile, he was the Deputy Minister of Mines and Energy from 1990 to 91, the Minister of Fisheries and Marine Resources from 1991 to 1995, the Minister of Finance from 95 to 96, and the Minister of Agriculture, Water and Rural Development from 1996 to 2004. In 2005, Angula was appointed the Director General of the National Planning Commission. So you can see again, a lot of the people contesting here today have got vast experience, not just within the party, but within government as well. The last contestant for the Vice President's position is Pendukeni Itana, who was appointed the Minister of Home Affairs and Immigration in 2015. She's been a member of the National Assembly since 1990, appointed as the Minister of Youth and Sport in 1991, appointed the Minister of Lands, Resettlement and Rehabilitation in 1996, and became the Attorney General of the Republic of Namibia in 2001. These are the 6 candidates running for the presidencies, 3 for the president, 3 for the vice president, and the election results will be out tonight. Let's take a break to have a quick insert. We'll be back right after that. Well, for those of you who are just joining us, we're coming from the 6th Elective Congress of the SWAPO Party. That's at the Safari Hotel and Conference Center, where it is D-Day, and we started covering the story because the elections are ongoing, and they're going to continue voting, and then the votes going to be counted with the results being announced here tonight. So it is a big day, not just for the SWAPO Party, but obviously for Namibia as well. But the tradition of Congress didn't start today. As I said, this is the 6th Elective Congress. It started way back in 1991. Now, we want to take a quick road down memory lane to show you what's happened at the previous Congresses and what is the culture of the SWAPO Party when it comes to this Congress. Let's take a look at the history and the timeline of Congresses of the SWAPO Party. Well, Namibia, all roads lead to the Safari Hotel and Conference Center. As I said earlier on, it is D-Day for the SWAPO Party. It is its 6th elective Congress where they decide who are going to be the leaders for the next 5 years. Obviously, this has been a highly contested competition. It just shows the spirit of the SWAPO Party. We have Professor Horn with us to give us an analysis of what's been taking place and what can we expect and what do these results actually mean, not just for the party but for the country. Professor, welcome back.
Thank you.
We started, obviously, the first day. There was big jubilation. It started off with a big party. Today, you don't even see or know there's a Team Harambee or Team SWAPO. What do you think is happening here?
Well, I think as far as the Congress goes is concerned, it's just another Congress. You know, you don't see any enmity. The things that the newspapers were talking about, you know, it's not really on the ground here. Surely the tension runs high, and everybody expects that you know, something should happen with their candidate, but I don't experience any kind of a real threat of a division or a big move away from the party by certain groups. That was not present here. It was not discussed around the tea tables and in private discussions. So I think the unity of the party is really not at stake at this stage.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about it in terms of what is the purpose of a Congress? What is it and has it been achieved?
Well, the main purpose of the Congress is, of course, always, especially for a ruling party, to measure its attainments of the last 5 years in the light of the previous Congress. You know, how much of the resolutions have been implemented successfully, where were the problems, and so on. And then, of course, again, to look forward. You know, the world never stands still. President Geinkop in his introduction speech said, the SWAPO of today is not the SWAPO of 20 or 30 years ago, for obvious reasons, you know, because the world has changed.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about that. You know, when you say SWAPO hasn't changed, but the world has changed, and as a result, the external forces have kind of led to the internal change, but we still have core values. Is that a fair statement from the president's side?
Well, look, I think if you really analyze the parties change, you know, sometimes because of political issues, sometimes because of changes in society, and because of you know, attempts to change society and didn't succeed, and then go back and try something else. So of course parties change, but I think what he tried to say is that there are certain values that the party wants to remain faithful to, whereas the things on the periphery can change all the time, and does change all the time.
Okay. Obviously, we know that before the Congress actually started, it seemed like there were two predominant camps that were taking place. The major camps were Team SWAPO and Team Harambee, but interestingly, after the closed session on the first day where the two former presidents spoke, that idea dissipated, where we started looking at the individual characters now running. Do you think that was important in terms of sustaining unity within the party and avoiding some form of factionalism after the Congress?
Well, my opinion from the outside was that, from the outset was that you can get people in your group and have different groups, but people won't vote that way. You know, our minds are not sort of electrified to think in that manner as well. We may like one candidate of one party and two of another, and so on. And when you speak to the people here, and the discussions around the tea tables, it was exactly that. You know, they said, well, we like this and we like that. I don't think there was really, in the minds of the people, a RMB and a SWAPO team. You know, I mean, the teams were there, obviously, and they worked together, but it was not really decisive for the eventual vote. And I mean, I'm trying to prophesy now. We don't have the results yet, but I think we will see that it was not a block vote, a group vote.
But that would be interesting. I mean, changing the idea from block voting, say, for instance, if you were a Team Harambee supporter and you wanted, for instance, vote for the president, for the presidency, but switch your vote for somebody else that's not part of that team. Do you think the former presidents enlightened that happening, where people can actually look at the individual merits of the candidates versus the merits of these blocks?
Well, everybody said that in their opening speeches. I mean, it started with the President Geinkop himself. He said, let us not sort of target people, look at ideas and look at not personalities, but ideas and abilities, capabilities, you know. So I think that will always be something in the minds of people. You know, it's kind of very difficult to vote en bloc in that sense. If it was a vote for the president and then allow him to appoint his team like a cabinet, that's of course something different. But when you have a private vote, people often split their vote. I mean, even in our own country, with the presidential vote and the party vote, you know, it's last time the president got about 6%, if I remember correctly, more than the party. So there's always this possibility that we can go one way with one part of the vote and another way with another. And I thought, what I heard here when I spoke to people, a lot of people is going to do that, you know.
I definitely got a sense that when the president acknowledged that, you know, this could be a storm, but it's also an opportunity for possibility for the pine and the cypress to grow and for the party to strengthen itself. Do you think they've actually been able to achieve that? Well, will SWAPO be stronger after this Congress?
Let's say that, let me say two things. I think the one is we will have to start living with this kind of congresses until Namibia created a more viable opposition, as I said on Friday as well. The election here has been seen by the population almost as a national election rather than a party election because of the fact that we don't have a strong opposition, you know. So I think what SWAPO will have to learn to live with is that while they are the governing party, now 27 years in power, they will have to make provision for, you know, internal discussion on leadership. Specifically, you know, a party with 80% of the vote in their hands, it's impossible that all 80% of people can even have the same ideological approach. So you will have different ideological and different practical approaches in the party, which will play, I think, a decisive role in the future. This is the beginning of something new in SWAPO, unless we somehow miraculously develop a stronger position within the next 10 years, which I don't see going to happen, you know.
But that's an interesting perspective, because I think in the theoretical framework of what democracies are, you know, we tend to favor multi-party democracy. But what if that multiplicity in terms of ideas, ideology, positions are inherited within one party and that scope exists? Does this mean that the multi-party democracy model then gets undermined by a one-party state?
I think if it develops in the way that it's being developed in SWAPO at the moment, it's healthy, you know, and it's sort of another way of allowing what multi-party democracy wants to attain: different opinions, different ideas, possibilities of ideological changes through elections. And even if it's only a party election, it's a sort of a similarity, you know. So I don't see it as a negative development.
Okay. Before we look at the resolutions, why is this a defining moment for Namibia and for the SWAPO party?
Well, I think for several reasons. The one is 2017 was not an easy year. You know, it's economic problems, unforeseeable issues in the region, a lot of decisions or a lot of issues that we've been lived with for 27 years. We'll have to take a second look at. You know, as I said, the economic situation, but also the political changes within our region is something that the party will have to deal with. Where are we standing? How are we going? You know, what role will it play in SADC in the future? Is SADC still a viable instrument for the region? These kind of things changed so dramatically in the last 5 years that it is very important, not only for SWAPO party, but also for the country to see where we're going in the next 5 years.
The party decided yesterday that they are going to have an elective Congress that focuses specifically on amendments to the SWAPO party constitution. Is that a move in the right direction?
Well, I think it is. Remember, the whole history of SWAPO was that of a liberation movement. Now they're in government for 27 years, so everything has changed. It's not a party in exile who's still thinking through how to obtain power and keep it. It's a party that's been in government for 27 years.
So let's focus a little bit on the resolutions. Obviously, you have been a big advocate in terms of the land acquisition and delivery one. How does a party deal with such an issue? Does it become a party issue or government issue?
Well,
where's the link?
Let's say it obviously has to start somewhere. You know, now we have spoken earlier about that. Our terms of reference is still the 1991 land conference. However, things have changed so drastically. I mean, just think of the last year when the landless people's movement came on the scene, standing specifically for ancestral rights, which was not really thought of. I mean, it was actually excluded in 1991. But it's been a very what is the word I'm looking for? A very not a new point, because it's always been there. It's been there in international law and everywhere else, but we never really took cognizance of it because of our decision at the land conference.
Yeah, and that decision is very interesting, where it says in 1991, no claims to ancestral land will be entertained in Namibia. Do you think we've changed that, or we are going to change it? How do you think the party and the country is going to deal with that?
Look, it was a kind of an obnoxious statement anyway, in the sense that ancestral land is acknowledged by international law. You know, in situations very similar to that of Namibia. If you think of our big friends in Western Sahara, they are fighting exactly for that, and they have an international judgment in their favor on ancestral land.
And so given that we're talking maybe from a legal perspective, the links between things like communal land and ancestral land, and if we're looking at certain programs like the resettlement programs, could traditional authorities become positioned to get some of those lands back?
Well, if you look at the Western Sahara case, the court said specifically that ancestral land cannot be lost could not be lost by colonization. In other words, if let's say a group of people, a traditional authority, for example, claims a piece of land as ancestral land, and they go to the International Court of Justice with enough evidence, of course, they can win this case. And then we're in the very obnoxious position where our, well, almost like Morocco, you know, their policy says there's no such thing as ancestral land, and they said what the Sarawi people calls ancestral land was res nullius, you know, land that belonged to no one. Now, if we land in that position before an International Court of Justice, I am almost 100% sure they will say that ancestral land is enforceable in terms of law.
That'll be an interesting one. Let's focus on some of the other resolutions, obviously, that are key within our country. Unemployment and poverty.
Yes, I mean, we all knew that it's getting harsh now and it's getting very difficult, you know, and the whole challenge of the government to sort of get the economy going is a big challenge, because there's no external factors that are assisting us now. It's not a booming international market. It's not interest in Africa even, or any of the things that were very conducive for development 10 or 15 years ago. And I mean, it is important to deal with these things. You know, it's not just going to get away. One of the important issues, for example, is job creating. How do you do it if there's no finances and no economy? And of course, although not discussed in depth in the Congress, the whole economic policy also brought a kind of a stop to NIEF, for example, because it is the whole idea behind NIEF is that there must be a developing policy or developing economy where the previously disadvantaged can, number one, buy into, where there's no money for buying into at the moment, and number two, to buy into growing businesses, which is also not sort of developing, and the expectation is not that it's going to happen in the next year or two.
But given the economy, do you think a government largely takes on the sole responsibility, where the responsibility needs to be more shared in terms of what the private sector does, how they think about redistribution, and how they think about people versus profits? Where there seems traditionally there's been a culture where businesses over-prioritize profits at the expense of the people, and therefore leading to the inequalities that we experience in our society. So has the government done a bad job in terms of not sharing that responsibility for economic growth and distribution through maybe swap or party-led policies?
Look, what we must remember is a government cannot grow the economy. They can only create a conducive atmosphere where the economy can grow. Now, what I think is important is that in a sort of a time of economic either stability or staleness without not growing economy, it's very difficult to implement distribution policies. You know, everybody is now fighting for himself, for herself. Although I don't think that the government should stop introducing policies. I mean, like NIEF, for example, I think there's a lot to be thought about it as yet. There's no clear plan on the table, you know, and most of the earliest plans were sort of weighed and and then dumped and so on. Doesn't mean that we should stop thinking about it. You know, there's still, I think, a burden on the government to make sure that we become a more equal society. I think what we should also remember, in an equal society, the economic downgrade always affects the poorest of the poor. So the problem becomes bigger, not smaller, and therefore there should always be programs, you know. And one of the good things about the Congress is they again establish the principle of a fairer distribution of wealth, which we can just never wipe it from the table, especially in a time of a bad economic situation.
Okay. Well, we're talking to Professor Horn, but at the same time, we're reporting to you live from the SWAPO conference, the 6th elective SWAPO Congress that's taking place here at the Safari Hotel and Conference Center. Voting is underway. The queues, people are voting for the top 4 positions as well as for the members of the Central Committee. We'll be giving you the election results as they come out. We'll be waiting as they do. But just to inform you, voting is taking place as we speak. Professor, let's talk about another very important part, which is gender equality, and how the SWAPO party, obviously through a prior constitutional amendment, brought about the 50-50 system, but also Zebra. And obviously today, as they're voting, that is critical. How did that shift power within the party? Do you think we were able to deconstruct norms around patriarchy, a man's world? How did it change power within the SWAPO party?
Well, look, I think one thing that very few people spoke about and very few people made the calculations, but at the previous election for SWAPO members of parliament, hadn't it been for the Zebra pattern, there would have been more women in parliament than men. In the elections, some of the very prominent members, and I won't mention names now, would have been out if it was just counting votes. In other words, what the people on the floor picked up at the previous Congress was that we should vote for women, you know, and so they overvoted. I almost wanted to say the 50% for women. It was the men who eventually benefit from it. In cabinet, more or less, not fully. It's still a little bit of a man's world, but possibly, well, definitely the best in Africa in terms of gender equality, and one of the best in the world. So we are doing well there. The complaint, of course, when you speak to younger members of parliament, is that you know, they don't get enough opportunity chairing committees, selected and standing committees, and so on. But this is a process. I'm sure we are moving in the right direction. We're an example for many. The other problem, of course, is that the private sector didn't follow suit. You know, where there it's still very much a man's world.
Interesting that the public sector is ahead of the private sector.
Yeah, indeed. More liberal than the private sector, isn't it?
But I mean, obviously in the context of liberation movements, we've seen largely, you know, the faces of these movements, the faces of this change are these men. Has SWAPO been able to, if we're looking at the trends of other liberation movements, it wanes over time. Over 25 years, parties like the ANC, they don't get as many votes as they did prior, but SWAPO has really accumulated when it comes to the polls, which is the true test of character in terms of democracy and the public. Do you think policies like gender equality, having more women in leadership, does something different?
Well, what I do think is that if you compare SWAPO, for example, with the ANC, SWAPO has been a much more progressive movement than the ANC. You know, the ANC had a period under Mandela which was progressive, but at the same time very divisive in terms of the racial policies, for example. You know, these some of the more left wing of the party thought that Mandela was too slow with it, he was too reconciliatory, and so on. And the result of that was, of course, the birth of the EFF, which is, unlike the two splits that we had in Namibia, quite a serious breakaway, you know, and a growing party, which we never had here in Namibia. So one SWAPO sort of had the lucky charm not to have big divisions, or divisions that affected them very much. Secondly, I think, as you said, that they are not seen as a sort of a conservative liberation movement, but really in many ways, I mean, in some ways they are. Like, for example, in the same-sex issue, SWAPO is very conservative, but in gender issues they are extremely liberal, and also in terms of their open election processes. So this is unique in Africa. We haven't seen anything like what we've seen here. So in that sense, I think the president said in his opening speech as well, he said, we didn't change, but we changed. You know, the world changed, and we need to adapt to it. And I think SWAPO is adapting reasonably well in this whole process.
Another interesting factor is obviously succession, especially in the intergenerational context. A lot of people have this idea that, okay, people who are older are in the 70s and the 80s, and then the younger people are like, we don't have access to it. But it seems like people between 40 and 60 also consider themselves a little younger. So how do we deal with generational issues when it comes to succession, when it comes to sharing of power, or also just a meaningful discourse within our political context?
Well, you know, again, the strange sort of balance between conservative and liberal, we find in SWAPO that when it comes to leadership, they are quite conservative. You know, the young people didn't come up that fast in South Africa. Well, and that is true of the whole Namibia political scene. You know, in South Africa, the opposition, the leader of the official opposition is not even 40 years old as yet, which is quite unthinkable in Namibia.
Well, our leader of the official opposition is also young.
Yeah, he is. You're right. You're right. I never thought of it. But he is also possibly, if he's 40, he's just 40. but he's also in that gap. Possibly because of a result of the old people in the DTA either left politics or are no longer there. You know, there was which is not true of SWAPO. I mean, the people who came from exile, they're all here and somehow even involved as the decision of the Congress to allow or give life membership of the Central Committee and Politburo to some of the old stalwarts of the party. And I think the other thing is also, unlike South Africa, where you had, it seems to me, factions in the party all the time. You know, when Mandela left, Mbeki almost came with a total new government. When Mbeki left, Zuma came with a total new government. The end of the year, we are in all possibility going to see another change of presidency, and in all possibility again a total new government. Whereas in Namibia, with every new president, we had a very consistency of keeping the old people in, which is on the one hand good for stability, on the other hand not so good for leadership. As we know, the party also discussed the leadership issue again, and in grooming new leadership, because it seems to be a concern.
But that's interesting. Do you think, for instance, we've seen the huge impact of the founding president, even here at the Congress, and we sensed how the energy and how people were campaigning, and when they were told that he didn't endorse any of the campaigns and actually didn't like the nature of the campaigns, found it to be very immature. Do you think the fact that, for instance, when we compare SWAPO to other liberation movements like the ANC, that the lack of having somebody that's so formidable with such levels of respect could be undermining the impact? Or how does that work? How do we make sense of that?
Well, look, there is only one Sam Nujoma, you know. I don't think any other country, not even Nelson Mandela, played the same role. I mean, he was this big hero, but he came and he went, whereas President Nujoma is almost the all-ever presence. And of course, he in even a non-participatory manner, he influenced a lot of things, you know, and he expressed himself very clearly on the whole idea of a big fight within the party, which was not good in his eyes. I do think that, I mean, again, you have this balance. You know, you have the president or the founding father with his ideas, but you also have the people who have some different ideas. I mean, it seemed to me, if I listened to his speech, he didn't like the idea of this campaigning at all. You know, he thought it shouldn't happen, and there's other ways to deal with it, and so on. Possibly a more, I don't know. Let me not guess, but a more organized manner of giving power over. You know, if we think of the early election where President Pohamba sort of came out as the winner, he had a good share of help from the founding father when he fired Idipo Matenya in the week before the election. You know, so the president, in his own ways, he played a very specific role, and maybe he still expects of the leaders to be more decisive. You know.
Obviously, we are going. The elections are happening right now. We are obviously going to be announcing the results tonight. What's important within a political context when we talk about political maturity and how people respond towards election results versus political immaturity and how people respond? What's the difference and why is maturity important?
Well, you know, you can take an example of other political parties where there was a political change at party elections. It often harmed the party very much. The losers are not always willing to stay in the party. I think the old apartheid nationalist party, they lost all their steam the day that Dirk Mutch lost the election for the party presidency against, was it was it still, it was not Kwesi Pretorius. Yeah, it was Kwesi Pretorius actually. It was when he lost that election. I mean, and he walked out. That was the end of the National Party. You know, after that there was just a spot in the air. Nobody were interested in them, not even the conservative whites. So there's there is an importance to sort of monitor and drive the elections of the party as well. But again, you cannot. How do they say? They say when a man's hour comes, it comes. You know, we cannot force a Congress like this to vote in any way that you want them to vote. So, and that can, of course, always be decisive. The important thing, I think, and that is what President Niyoma also spoke about, the losers should stay in, you know, don't go out. Make sure that you still support one another, which can become a huge challenge if it's not the president of the state. You know?
But I mean, also in terms of the president that's been said prior, the people who did break away have recently gone back to the SWAPO party. What do we make of that?
Well, that is also true. You know, I was amazed when I was watching television to see the camera was constantly focusing on Michaela Hoopslee. You know, she was always there, almost the almighty presence. Which and what she said was that you know we felt the need to leave back then, but looking at the scenario of the parties, the best places to be in. Ben Olenga is back. You know, it must be extremely difficult for SWAPO people.
It's cold outside, SWAPO.
Yeah, exactly that. You know.
Okay, now let's get into the betting, the gambling now. As a political pundit, where would you put your eggs? Which basket's going to get the most eggs in? Tell us, what are your predictions for tonight's election results?
Well, and it's just sort of keeping my ear on the ground. I think
you don't want to be too premature.
No, let me take my guess. I think the president and the Minister of International Affairs, I think they're quite safe. It seems to me, what I've heard, what I listened to. We may have a deviation from the Harambee team in the Secretary General position, which, remember, if the candidate from the north, Armas, if he gets in as Secretary General, you must get a woman there again as Deputy Secretary General to have the zebra pattern, which means that the Harambee candidate will fall out there as well. And I would think that is a reasonable possibility.
Okay. In summary, how would you describe what's taking place over the last 4 days? Obviously, we know that Congress is more than just elections. How do we sum it up? How does the nation make sense of everything that's transpired here?
Well, I think by and large there were no big surprises. You know, there were no issues coming from the floor that surprised people. The issues that came forward was expected. Some good, some I think not so good, which we can discuss later. But I think it was a quite reasonable, successful party congress. I thought beforehand that the leadership issue and the election would play a much bigger role in the run-up to it, but it didn't. It was quite silent. You know, here and there somebody would go out of their way and say a few things, but generally people stuck to the agenda and didn't bring the political debate or the election debate rather than political debate into every discussion on the floor.
Professor Horn, thank you very much for your time. We spoke the first day, we speak to the last day. I'm sure we're both biting our nails to see who's going to win tonight, but thank you for making time out for us.
Pleasure is mine.
Remember, you know we're giving you a live update from the Safari Hotel and Conference Center where the voting is going on right now, where the SWAPO delegates, 784 delegates from all 14 regions, from the women's wing, from the SPYL, they're all here to vote for the top four as well as the Central Committee meeting. The real big question is, has SWAPO gained political maturity in the way that they've handled this Congress? But we're yet to see what's going to happen after the elections. It is for the top 4: President, Vice President, SG, that's the Secretary General, as well as the Deputy Secretary General. And remember, we need a gender balance in that result. So 2 of the top 4 have to be men and 2 have to be women. We'll be back later to give you the results, but we'll keep you updated. Namibia, keep your eyes locked on NBC1. For now, from me, Patrick, Sam, and the team, we'll be back. Stay with us.